Did you watch any of that debate last night?
Hi, everybody. We're still just admitting some folks here, so I do have everybody on mute for right now. All right, and so being that it is 10:02 and we've got a lot of robust material coming up, I am going to go ahead and get started with this webinar. So the National Council of Urban Indian Health proudly presents the Creating Resilient Board of Directors members in the era of COVID-19. And so today I will be your host. My name is Zipporah Fuller. I am the Director of Technical Assistance here at NCUIH. And so I wanted to just ask for folks that are just joining on, if you could please submit your name, your organization, and your tribal affiliation in the chat box. In addition to that, if you could also, in your Zoom name, if you could add your organization that you're with into the Zoom name renaming box, if you will, as well. Next slide. And so just, again, some housekeeping rules. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us today. This webinar is being recorded. All mics have been muted unless otherwise directed. We do ask that you turn on your camera to allow for fun interaction. This will be a 2-hour session with a 5-minute break. We also do ask that you stand by, as this is going to include polling questions as well as breakout rooms. We do ask that questions be typed into the chat box. A Q&A session will be offered at the end of the session, and slides and recordings will be available at the clickable link, and an evaluation to follow at the end of the session. We welcome your feedback. Next slide, please. So here are just the instructions on how to ask a question or a comment. If you just hover your mouse down at the bottom of the screen, you will see a little section that does say chat. So go ahead and feel free to insert your questions. There's also a really nice little button down below that also has reactions with an applause hand as well as a thumbs up too. So feel free to use those options as well. Next slide. So today's session of the Creating Resilient Board of Directors members in the era of COVID-19 is focused around thinking ahead, emergency strategic planning, and succession planning during COVID-19. Next slide. So today we have a guest facilitator joining us. Her name is Joanne Schlosser. She is the president of Rising Stars, a management consultant, a professional certified coach, a speaker, a facilitator who works with high-performing healthcare leaders that want to grow their career and their organization. Joanne has over 15 years of healthcare experience. She is a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives and served on the administrative team for 3 hospitals. Joanne's BS in Production Operations Management and her MBA assisted small minority and women-owned businesses in winning government and contractor contracts. Her clients won over $113 million in contracts in 13 years, and she was awarded Volunteer of the Year by the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. Joanne has designed and delivered thousands of high-content, high-energy presentations over a variety of leadership topics. Over 200 clients include Abrazo Healthcare, Banner Health, the Crisis Response Network, Gila River Healthcare, Phoenix Indian Medical Center, and United Healthcare. Please join me in welcoming today's facilitator, Joanne Schlosser.
Thank you, Zipporah. I am so excited to be here with all of you and look forward to sharing lots of great information. So the key learning objectives we're going to talk about today are reviewing strategic planning. So there were two different kind of write-ups on the NCUIH website. So when some of you gave us your input, I just want to clarify that I know that there was a strategic planning session in the spring some of you had a chance to go to. So I'm going to touch on that, but then I also want to talk more about emergency and risk planning, since this whole theme is around in times of COVID, and we'll touch on introducing some contingency succession planning. We have a small enough group with less than 20 people that I really want to be able to make it very interactive. As Zepp had mentioned, we're going to ask you to type things in the chat box. We'll have some polls. I want to make sure that when you have specific questions, please put them in the chat box, and the NCUIH staff will be able to read the questions to me, and we'll take periodic breaks to make sure that we're getting your questions answered. So at the end of 2 hours, I want you to say, I got what I came for. It may not have been on one of the slides. The slides are kind of high level, but we were able to dive into many of the questions and ideas that you have. And the breakout rooms will give you a chance to share thoughts with each other, because some of you are doing some very innovative things, and sharing that information will help make everyone smarter and better together. And that's what I love about facilitating. You will not get all the knowledge from me. It is definitely going to be from each of you as well. So with that, I did learn that many of you who are on today's session are fairly new board members, 1 to 2 years. So definitely still in that learning mode, having served on a number of boards. The learning curve goes up. And so I'm really thrilled that NCUIH is offering these sessions to help you be better board members, better leaders in your organizations, so that you can best serve your organizations. So with that, let's talk a little bit about strategic planning. Usually, remember when we used to use that word usually before COVID kind of said new normal and everything is different? Usually strategic planning is done for a 3-year period, occasionally for 5 if people are really thinking out maybe big capital projects and things. In today's new normal, a lot of my clients are thinking 1 to 3 months for short-term planning, and strategic planning thinking far out is 6 to 12 months right now, because there's just so many unknowns. Again, normally, it would be something that your organization would review annually, and then take a look at where things are. In general, when you're looking at strategic planning, you're looking at the things that are most important to the organization. So key aspects, finance. One of my former bosses used to say things like, no margin, no mission. So you're not there to make a profit, but you are there to make sure that you invest enough in your organization to make sure that you can keep providing the services that you're providing to your members. Finance, taking care of your members or patients, depending what your organization calls them, taking care of your staff, looking at internal processes, looking at your organizational capacity and what you have the ability to do, and then perhaps thinking about growth, new things that you might want to offer, needs that are perhaps going unmet. So generally at a very high level, that's what strategic planning would look like. So we're going to do a quick poll to get a sense right now. If the poll could come up, does your organization currently have a strategic plan? You have 3 options. So let's quickly vote. We'll keep it open about another 10 seconds since we've got 6 votes in out of 16 people. Okay, let's take about another 10 seconds. Okay, we can close the poll. Most votes are in. We have 12 votes. 10 of you have a strategic plan. Congratulations. I'm so glad to hear that. One organization does not, and one person is not sure. And I figured that would happen because sometimes new board members may not be sure of what's going. So we can share those results. Can I do that? There you go. So everybody can see them. Good. That gives me a sense of, again, I don't want to talk down to you if you're very familiar with strategic plans. I don't want to lose you if you've never done a strategic plan. So we're trying to just gather a little bit of data to figure out where everybody is today. So on the assumption that you have a strategic plan, and maybe some of the newer folks here have not had a chance to help create one, but perhaps they've already seen and been involved with their organization's plan, we'll move forward. Okay, it's not letting me go back forward. There we go. Okay, sorry. So these are some of the things that you would normally see in order to get to a strategic plan. It's sort of a 5-step planning process. So you start with your organization's mission. And I had the opportunity to look at some of your websites. So some of the missions tend to sound similar. And if you'd like, it'd be fun to see if you'd like to type, if some of you know your organization's mission, to put it in the chat box now. Here's one. The mission is to provide accessible, holistic, patient-centered care with culturally sensitive health and wellness services. Okay? So in order to figure out anything that your organization wants to do, the first step is, what is your organization about? And I've worked with boards and I've worked with senior leadership to create organizational missions and visions, or occasionally to tweak them. So starting with that root, and again, the strategic planning process, depending on your organization, can be started at the leadership level in the organization and approved by the board. And in other organizations I've worked with, the board creates the strategic plan. So there's not a right or wrong, it just depends on which way your organization prefers to do it. Then you think about, so the mission is what it is your organization is trying to do. The vision is kind of the bigger global thing that you might not get to, but it guides your actions. And so an example of a vision, and this is Native Health, and I'm so glad Walter was able to join us. Healthy people in healthy communities. The Seattle Indian Health Board envisions a time when all Indian people have healthy and successful lives. So if you think about what your mission is, which is more tangible of health and wellness services, and you think about your vision of impacting the whole community that you serve, the next step is a gap analysis. What are you currently doing versus what you would like to be doing? Okay. And so that might engage your board or your staff in a couple of hours reviewing an existing strategic plan, or a 1 or 2 day retreat to actually stop and look at what are the things that you want to be doing as an organization? What are the gaps between where you are and where you want to be? And so when I facilitate a strategic planning retreat like that, whether you have someone come in and help you, or one of your board members or staff facilitate your retreat, you're looking at a brainstorming process where all ideas are put on the table. No ideas are bad in the beginning. We want to get everybody's thoughts out there and make it very comfortable for people to share. Then after we get them out there, we have discussion about the pros and cons. We then might do some multi-voting to narrow what we can accomplish in a given time period, prioritize, perhaps create a timeline, and then move to set goals. And over that timeline, what do we want to do in the first year, the second year, the third year? Some organizations break it down by year, some by quarter, some by month. so that you have a picture of, if you want to get here, what are the things you need to do to get there? You set goals, and then you monitor the progress. As a board, that's one of your key roles. You're not supposed to be real hands-on getting the work done. Your job is to make sure the work is getting done and that you're helping to guide the organization in the desired direction. So there's a couple of ways you can do some of this. The first is a SWOT analysis. And it'd be great if you could type in the chat box. Oops, and sorry, I'm not seeing the chat box. Give me just a second so we can go in and see. Thank you. Mike said the mission of IHC SVC is to help ensure the survival and healing of American Indians and Alaskan Natives in our community by providing high quality, comprehensive healthcare and wellness services. Excellent. Thank you. And then if everybody wants to type in the chat box, if you've used a SWOT analysis before, just yes or no. So we get a sense again of how deep to dive. Walter, yes, thank you. Joanne, no. Janine, yes, good. Mike, yes, excellent. Good. All right. So SWOT is it's often done in a 4-box grid if we had a flip chart or if we were going to break out into rooms and work on one. But we'll do this a little bit as a group. And so the SWOT analysis, the strengths and weaknesses are usually things that are inside your organization. So when we think about what are your organizational strengths, it might be great leadership, as an example. When we think about organizational weaknesses, perhaps you have a lot of vacancies that need to be filled right now. And so you can't provide all the services that you want. The opportunities and the threats tend to be more externally focused. What's going on in your community? What's going on in your region? What's going on in the country or the world that might be impacting what you offer? So obviously, threats, COVID would be the #1 that's impacting all healthcare right now. Opportunities might be something like telemedicine, might be something that's new to your organization. So let's take a minute and have you put in the chat box what you said, put S- one of your organization's strength or W- one of your organization's weaknesses. And let's see what some thoughts are. Give everybody a minute so the chats start to show up. I was on a session yesterday where there were about 1,000 people and the chats were coming in so quickly, they were scrolling faster than we could read them. Great, one strength, Jeffrey said, is that you're community-based. Excellent. Anybody else have another they want to share? And as Zepp had mentioned, if you're able to be on screen, that's awesome. Mike, financially sound. Boy, in these challenging times, that is really important. Lisa said team-oriented. Excellent. All right. How about if we jump in on what are some of the opportunities or threats that you see your organization taking? Again, an O for opportunity and a T for threat. Some people will cry there's lots of lemons, but I've been surprised to see what some of the opportunities are that innovative healthcare organizations are doing. So creative thinking will also often help you see what's out there and what's possible. Anybody have any opportunities or threats they'd like to share? Great, so one threat from Lisa is racism acts toward our organization. Absolutely. I've heard that some organizations have been experiencing some threats, some graffiti, and some issues. Definitely a concern for your staff and your patients. All right. Well, we will pop into the next tool and see if we can gather some more thoughts. Okay, here we go. SWOT Analysis. I'm not sure why. Sorry, I'm having to hit the forward key a couple times, so I apologize for the delay. So some of you may have used SWOT, which is similar to SWOT, but I find that a number of my nonprofit clients like this a little bit better. So similar to the first, you're looking at strengths. And in this definition, we use for strengths, we say, what are some of the things that we can build on? Okay. Opportunities, what are our stakeholders asking for? So those are similar to what we just did with SWOT, but the opportunities might be a little different. And then if we were going to soar on the wings of an eagle, the next part is, what are your aspirations? What does your organization, what do you as board members, what is your executive director, what do you all care deeply about? And then, what are the results you want to achieve? How will you know if you're succeeding? So we need metrics. And I know that coming up in one of the future sessions, Step will be leading a session on metrics and dashboards. So I would definitely encourage you to attend that. So this feels a little bit different. If you're looking at what's going on and you're thinking about what are some of the aspirations, we want to do a better job of serving our diabetic population. We're seeing an increase in domestic violence, particularly during COVID times. We want to do something proactive about that. We're seeing an increase in substance use. We want to do something about that. So these are tools you would use around that gap analysis as you're creating your strategic plan or revising it. And then thank you, Sonia, who's on the call with some members from her organization. The Indian Health Center of Santa Clara Valley was awesome. Sonia and Ira and Richard met with us to share some thoughts to help prepare for today's presentation, as well as for next Monday's Finance for the Non-Financial Manager, which I really encourage all of you to take. And so if you look at this strategy map, a strategy map is a visual representation of the organization's overall objectives. And so it's usually created at or after you create your strategic plan so you can look at it. So at the top, you see their timeline, it's a 3-year plan. Then you see their mission statement. Then you see the 4 key perspectives they're focusing on: members, finances, internal processes, and organizational capacity. And then within each, they've broken down to share 2 to 4 goals in each category. And this is so smart, because if you try to focus on 100 things, as I honestly had one nonprofit healthcare try to do because they wanted to change the world, if you're focusing on 100 things, you're focusing on nothing. You're so scattered, your staff don't know what to focus on first. So when you can be very clear, there's 3 key member things to focus on, 2 for finance, etc., it drives you to be more specific and more focused so that you can use this as a visual representation. When I worked with the Phoenix Indian Medical Center, they had their strategy map blown up, I want to say 3 feet by 6 feet on their boardroom conference wall. So it was there for every meeting that they could look at and remind themselves of what they wanted to focus in on. Then you start doing a deeper dive. When you've got that high level, big picture, what you want to focus on, then you start to go deeper to figure out how are we going to get there? How do we set some specific goals? What are some of the tactics? And again, this is where staff is going to get more involved. They're more hands-on, more specificity. What are some of the tactics? What are some of the metrics that let you know if you're going the right way? One healthcare organization I worked with actually put arrows on their metrics so that if someone was not clinical, if it was a clinical metric, they would understand if the number should go up or down to show improvement. Because not everybody knows, what they're looking at. If you want to reduce A1C for a diabetic patient population, not everybody might know what you're looking at, as an example. So these are some things that you want to look at. As you're working on these, you can come up with some specific things that staff might be tracking. For example, number of patients seen, number of no-shows, revenue metrics, improvement in substance use treatment programs, diabetic improvement programs, etc. And then again, going back to Indian Health Center of Santa Clara Valley, they were able to share their strategic plan balanced scorecard, which is another tool that many organizations use. So if you look on the far left, you'll see those same 4 perspectives. And then in the first yellow column, these are the objectives that were in the strategy map. And then as we go left to right, and I'll get into this in more detail on a slide where I can make it a little bigger, then they're getting more granular with each goal. So in a visual representation, this is something that very clearly lets you as a board member or leader see, what are we focusing on? What are some of the most important details? Who is responsible? And over time, how are our numbers tracking? There's some great resources out there on Balanced Scorecard. And I asked Sonia if I could put them on the spot and share that they heard this. And she said, of course. So I know that she and her organization are also a great resource, as well as I'm sure many of you who are on the call, which is why I want you to be able to have time to talk to one another. So when you're creating your balanced scorecard, I'd love to see in the chat box, how many of you currently use a balanced scorecard? Again, just a quick yes or no would be great. Great, Mike, yes, thank you. If you're not, this is something I would definitely encourage you to consider. It's a great way, again, it can be put on a wall, it can be used at all board meetings to help people understand what are some of the things that you're doing, and you're able to track results over time. Anyone else using a balanced scorecard? Okay, well, there's a best practice for you to take away from today. Seems like whenever I pull up the chat boxes is when it doesn't want to move forward. There we go. Okay, so what happens when things don't go according to plan? Or stuff happens. This happens to be one of the meetings that I had the privilege of facilitating when Rear Admiral Wiyaki was still at Phoenix Indian Medical Center with Rose and Pam and Darren Iatella. So we were thinking ahead. We were doing some leadership development back then. And when things don't go according to plan, there's a couple things you want to do. First, you need to develop an interim plan. What do we do? If you're strategic planning and then you're working on some of the emergency planning we'll get to, can you have a plan A or a plan B? I live in the White Mountains here, and there's high fire danger. And so a lot of my neighbors told us when we bought up here that you have a go bag, that if there's an emergency and you have to leave, you need to be prepared. keep together things that would be important, or if there's a warning of a problem. Some of you, it might be hurricanes, tornadoes, other kinds of natural disasters. If you need to leave your property, California, Oregon, Arizona, so many places have had horrific wildfires where people needed to evacuate. You might say, well, that doesn't affect me, but it does, because what about your patients or members who are diabetic or need other medications that they might need to quickly get before they evacuate, or other issues? So thinking about what are some of the things that might happen, and how can you chat on some of the things that could go wrong. So curious, as you think about other things that might have happened this year, in addition to COVID, your patient population might have been impacted by higher levels of unemployment, by fire, by other kinds of threat, by drought. When there's no rain, if they're growing crops, that impacts community gardens, it impacts local food sources. So there's all kinds of issues potentially. So going back to the balanced scorecard, this is a little bit bigger, but I know as I made it bigger, it's still a little hard to read. So I'll go through it with you. We have the perspective and the number, and then the objective. So I picked the two from finance. So the objective is to facilitate financial management and sustainability. Excuse me. And then the description says Indian Health Center will expand services and improve access to care by managing financial resources to support strategic growth and to safeguard IHC, its members, employees, and community. So very clear about what the finances are for. The person who is championing the objective is Richard, who happens to be their Chief Financial Officer. And then, how do you get that to happen? It's not waving the magic wand. It's creating specific measures. So the first measure is maintaining a 60 to 120 day operating cash reserve and reinvesting any excess into the organization's mission. And again, the metric owner is also Richard. Sometimes the champion is at a very high level, and the metric owner might be at a more hands-on level, especially those of you who have larger organizations. So why is this important? Well, we know that nationwide, many people live paycheck to paycheck. Many organizations barely have their operating income above the bottom line. So it could be that if you don't have sufficient cash on hand, when something happens, you don't have the cash reserves that you need. One example being, I know organizations that had to pay up to 8 times normal price for PPE earlier this year. If you don't have extra operating cash on hand for that, what do? Some organizations need to hire maybe short-term temporary staff to either fill gaps when people were out or as added. And we'll talk more about that. So if you're operating with a cash flow that gives you extra reserves, when emergencies arise or opportunities arise, good and bad, you're in a better position to take advantage. And if you have that kind of reserve and things go bad and you're at your high end, just like we've always been told personally, right? We should accumulate 6 months worth of savings as an emergency, or at a minimum of $500 to be able to pay for a car repair. In your organization, you want to think the same way. So if you had a 4-month reserve and things happened and you brought it down to a 2-month reserve, you still have the capacity to do what you need to do. And if I'm losing you with cash reserves and things like that, please attend Lori's session on Monday. I've watched her present it 3 times already, and each time I learn something new. So if you're not financially savvy, it's a great learning opportunity or reminder. And then the second goal there is at the end of the fiscal year 2021, a one-year goal, there'll be a positive net operating margin. So again, if you're in a deficit, how do you continue to move up? And then you could get to more specificity down the road. So on the right-hand side of that, you are tracking metrics over time. So this is a great way to, again, visually keep people on track with your balanced scorecard to make sure that things are where you need them to be. And when a crisis occurs, you have extra cash on hand to be able to do what you need to do. Now, some of you I know wanted to get more into the emergency planning part, so I want to make sure we take time to cover this as well. If you have a HRSA approved organization, some of you have patient-centered medical homes, you already probably have an emergency plan for your UIO that has established written policies, procedures, and plans that have to address all of these things at a minimum. Fire, bomb threats, medical emergency with your own staff on site, equipment breakdowns, power outages, hostage situations, weather disasters, and then we could add others. Racial tension, preventing people from getting to work, causing challenges in the work environment, things of that nature. And then other, number one, red flag, COVID. Number two, what if the government shuts down? If you're counting on your money coming in from the federal government, and how many years have we seen that there's a shutdown and there's no cash flow? So I would love to see, to better understand how many of you already have an emergency plan. So if we could bring up this poll, please. Noel, there we go. Okay, I'm just starting to see it now. So please take a minute and let us know if your organization currently has an emergency plan. Okay, we'll give it about 20 seconds. So if your fingertips aren't on your computer, you can grab your computer, please. And we've got 7 out of 18 votes in. And Zep's got a reminder, the Balanced Scorecard session is on October 30th for webinar 4, and Finance for Non-Financial Managers is Monday, the 26th. And Lisa is not sure if they have an emergency plan. Okay, I'm going to end the polling. And so you can see that we've got about half the votes. 8 have an emergency plan. Nobody said no, and 1 not sure. Fair enough. Okay. Noelle, if you can make that go away for me, please. Thanks. Okay. Got it, so we can see that. Great. All right, so knowing that some of you have an emergency plan and some do not, if you have an emergency plan and it covers the things that HRSA required, then one of the things that you want to be able to do is to add things to it. So if you live in an area where there might be disasters, that might be something you want to add. If you are dealing with COVID, you want to have a COVID plan. So even if you're not required to have an emergency plan, I would highly encourage you to do that. And you might ask one of your fellow organizations or you might be able to go online and find some that are samples, and then you can adapt it to the needs of your organization. One of the smartest things that I can recommend for you is we've been through the first wave of COVID, and there are a lot of articles right now that COVID numbers around the country are spiking. And in the areas that we are in, I know that that is also true. So stop and do a meeting with the staff if you have not already. Some people call this an after action review after a meeting, event, a problem, a disaster. And ask these questions and brainstorm. What worked well? What did we do that worked? Come up with some ideas. What did we do that didn't work? What do we need to do to be better prepared? And then who's responsible? And this is really important because if I throw out an idea, like it didn't work that we didn't have enough PPE. So somebody says, okay, we should have more PPE. That's an idea. But if we get into who's responsible, and one of my favorite accountability tools is WWW, which is not the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. It's who will do what by when. So let's just say that Zipporah here is working with you and she happens to be in charge of procurement. So you determine that she would be responsible. That's a good step. So who will do what? She will order supplies by November 6th. Good. That's a goal. But if we want to turn it into a SMART goal, we would add specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-focused. So we would add a couple key components. She will order 1 extra month of PPE based on our usage in, let's say, August, in addition to the supplies we think we'll need for November. Now she knows what she's going to do, when she needs to do it by November 6th, the quantities and items to procure based on the August. So now she's going to be successful versus leaving a meeting where we say, somebody should order PPE. That's an idea. So to get it from an idea into WWW and a SMART goal, assign a date, a specific task, and a specific person, similar to going back to the balanced scorecard. It gives you clarity for your team to know who's going to do what and to look at what needs to be done. So looking at inventory levels, appointment scheduling, other issues that you might have had, what were some of the lessons learned? Perhaps using more telemedicine, perhaps recognizing one healthcare organization that I'm familiar with learned that telemedicine did not go very well in the beginning. And so they were finding that it was wasting the provider's time when the person they wanted to either speak with or see was not technologically savvy. So what they learned very quickly was to have a medical assistant or some other member of staff reach out to the person the day before the appointment, confirm the appointment, do a dry run, debug any technology that wasn't working, so that when the provider was going to meet with the person, it went quickly and smoothly, and they were able to see more people efficiently, and everybody was able to work at the top of their license and skills. So that might be one of the lessons learned that you could add if that was an issue that you were dealing with. Okay, any questions so far? Please pop them into the chat box.
You can also feel free to unmute your line as well if you'd like to verbalize your questions or comments.
Absolutely. Okay, no questions so far. I'll keep going, but if they come up at any point, please ask. So another part of the strategic thinking as you're moving along is asking, are there any new services that your organization wants or needs to provide or to expand. We've talked about a few already. And as the numbers that are climbing, one of the things to think about for you might be in 2021, we know that vaccines will begin to be available. We also know that there will likely not be a sufficient quantity in the beginning, especially. So how are you going to prioritize who gets vaccines? That might be something that as an organization you want to talk about. Great question, Joanne. Is it appropriate for board members to be micromanaging WWW? Perhaps not, but it again would depend on what a board member is doing. If a board member offers to reach out, say, on a grant or something, they might be accountable, or to reach out to increase the board scope and size. A nominating committee would be likely to use WWW. So there's a way that you could use it, but there's also a way to teach your staff to use it if it's more for purchasing supplies. So thank you for letting me clarify that. Great question. Good. Excellent. Bridging the gap on digital divide for telehealth. Excellent. Thank you. So there's lots of possibilities. If you're not doing contact tracing, and there's a need for that in your area, that's a service line that I've seen some other organizations pick up that would not normally have been part of their scope of services. Again, thinking out of the box, one organization decided to start providing on-site childcare for their essential workers because the normal childcare facility was not available and they needed to keep their staff coming to work. Home care for high-risk members of your population. So thinking about some of those, and I'll elaborate on some of those later, but those might be some things that are possible. One thing I just saw on the internet channel Newsy yesterday was that here in Arizona, the Hopi Nation, like the Navajo Nation, often has many homes. I think they said yesterday 38% of the Hopi homes don't have running water. And so one of the ideas that they came up with for the, with I think some of the CARES money, was they were building these easy to build hand washing stations that could be put in front of each home that was able to have water dispense, soap dispense, and then a drain. And so that they could do the 20 seconds of hand washing appropriately to keep infection rates down. So again, that might be something your organization would never have thought of, and you have more of urban Indian population. So your needs may be a little different, but I'm trying to help you think more broadly to where there are populations that we know that are in need, and this might be services that potentially you could help with. Any other ideas? Feel free to come off mute if your organization has come up with a new service that you'd like to provide. I'd love for you to share. Okay, so other things that could go wrong. What happens if the number of patients that need your care overwhelms your capacity? I imagine that some of you have had that experience recently. I'd like to share a couple of different scenarios here in Arizona that I know a number of you from Arizona are already familiar with, but for our other folks, maybe not. So here we have many, many tribes and many tribal members who are not living on reservations, but the Navajo Nation and the White Mountain Apache tribe have suffered extensively with COVID this year. The Navajo Nation has made national news, so I know I don't need to go into great detail, but with lots of lockdowns. As of the 18th, There were over 10,955 tribal members who had contracted COVID on the reservation. I know as of this morning, the numbers are well over 11,000, and 573 deaths on the Navajo Nation as of October 18th. So they were clearly overwhelmed and employed a number of strategies. One was deploying some of the sicker patients to healthcare centers and hospitals around the state. Arizona actually decided to try to balance the COVID population so that not every place would be hit and different hospitals would take on a proportion of patients. Another thing that they did was reached out to nurses and other caregivers who could come to the Navajo Nation and provide care when it was above the abilities for people to provide care there. So looking at where do you ask for help? How do you get help? Trying to, you know what might be easier for Noelle, if you can read things from the chat box rather than me flipping back and forth when there's questions or comments, that would be super. So as we're going forward, so that's one way that they looked at it. Here in the area where I am, I'm about 4 miles from the White Mountain Apache tribe, and they were also hit very hard by COVID. As of today, about 16% of their tribal members on the reservation have been infected. But I'm excited to share a really cool story that this article was on the front page of our Arizona Republic in Phoenix on Monday that goes statewide. That was headed, "I'm so glad that I'm alive today," with another half page that talks about some of the things that the White Mountain Apache tribe did. And again, these might be some things that you could do, because the great news with them is that their fatality rate, unlike the Navajo Nation, is at 1.6% as of when this was published, which is less than the Arizona rate of 2.5% and the country nationally at 2.7%. So a couple things you might consider for what they've been able to do are they use robust contract tracing. They started in-person wellness checks. They had 30 to 35 healthcare workers trained in contact tracing at the peak. And they have over 2,400 cases that have been identified. And at this point, 41 confirmed deaths. What they started doing when they did the contract tracing, in addition to asking the typical question of who have you been in contact with, knowing that many tribal members live in 2-bedroom homes with 8 to 10 people of multiple generations, as is often common in many Native homes, they started asking the question, who are your grandparents? And they started coming and doing in-home visits to check on the patient and the family members. And in this case, they said that they were often able to identify a term that was new to me, perhaps familiar to you, happy hypoxemia. So using when they would ask someone, person would say they felt good, but by using the oximeter that reads the blood oxygen levels, they could show the real picture. The person might not know they were sick, infected, and actually needed hospitalization. So by identifying cases early because of known contact, they were able to change things. They also had some family members who were choosing to sleep in tents in the yard to try to protect people in the home, but they learned that there was still an 80% infection rate within the home because of shared bathrooms and shared cooking utensils and eating utensils. So those are some things that you might want to consider as part of maybe an educational campaign to patient population and looking at things that you can do to potentially serve your community. The other thing that the White Mountain Apache tribe did is they operate 2 hotels and a casino. And so, of course, most of those entities nationwide have been closed for a period of time. They used the hotel, which already had culinary staff and housekeeping staff, to house ill members of the community and homeless members of the community that were at high risk, where they could protect them and others and provide the needed services. So I thought that was a brilliant solution of using a nearby resource to care for the patient population. Any questions or thoughts there? Anything in the chat box we want to talk about?
Again, please feel free to take yourself off of mute to provide any comments as well. And there's nothing currently in the chat box.
Okay, then what I'm going to do is Noelle is going to break you up into groups of 4. And we're going to give you about 6 minutes to talk about what are some of the biggest issues that you're seeing for the next 6 months coming up, some of the challenges, and some potential solutions. So in groups of 4, you'll have a few minutes to talk, and then we'll debrief. And then when you come back from that, after we debrief, then we will go on a quick break. And so I look forward to each of you getting to contribute personally in the chat rooms.
You guys should be receiving a join chat room prompt in just a moment, and then you'll just click on join breakout room and then the corresponding number.
Thank you.
Hi, Deborah. They're all in breakout rooms right now. I'm happy to put you in one if you'd like to join the conversation, but they should be back in just a few minutes as well.
Okay, so they should have already been about done. So do you know how to end them and do the countdown? Because if you go in and you click end, did you set that up or is it going to end it right away?
No, I was going to broadcast a message and just say 1 minute.
Yep. So it does a countdown on the top, broadcast a message and say we're going to be finishing up in about a minute, and then click the end because it should have a countdown. You should have had that set up in the back end of Zoom, is if you set it up. It should be there. Because sometimes it's 60 seconds and sometimes it's 2 minutes. And when I did it, it was set for the 2 minutes.
Where did you?
So it should be, oh, I wish you could share screen. It should be right when you open up the message, there's a chat thing at the very bottom. It should said end breakout rooms or something. And in the back door, when you made the meeting, it should have that countdown. So it should have a 60-second counter on there.
Close all rooms, so it should.
So that's all you have?
Yeah.
That should be the counter. You should be able to click it and it should start counting. And then the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to throw everybody back in here and then it's over and that's fine. We'll move on. So I think you should just click it. Click it.
Yes.
Have a counter?
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. Well, what's the counter countdown?
60 seconds. Thank you.
Yep. Are you able to throw me back into that room? Because I did that. Okay, do that so I can verify that it's actually going, because I did that last time and it didn't do it. So
It
throw me
actually just
back.
says you need to join
Oh,
them. Like you should be
okay.
able to. Everyone's coming back.
Yep, it's fine then. Cool, word.
Welcome back. Oh, it looks like we lost a couple. Oh, here they go. Everyone's coming back in now. Great. So let's take a minute before we go on break. I'd love to hear what are some of your challenges and some of your ideas. Anybody, come on off mute and let's share.
I think for my group, the challenges we saw were staffing and also the continued environmental issues, like in California, the smoke from the fires and whatever else that creates, and also testing and vaccination, and that has a realm of issues. The availability of vaccinating, and the wherewithal to provide vaccines, and then especially vaccine specific for elders.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great, great rec lists. Any other group have some that they want to share?
Our group just talked about, well, it was a very small group, and we just talked about some of the challenges that we face and what our focuses were as far as our staff and helping them to navigate and continue to provide for their families while they're dealing with their families and increased costs at home. Everybody being home with their families 24/7 and having to provide electricity and internet and trying to work. It's no longer work-life balance, it's work-life integration, and it's a huge challenge. And how can we assist, but at the same time ensure the organization is performing and moving forward, even if it's incremental improvement.
And incremental improvement is improvement. If you keep on making incremental improvement, it's amazing what you can accomplish. So thank you for that. And in our group, I'll add that we talked about residential housing, some issues, and particularly the importance of working with other community partners to be able to serve the needs of the community. So that was really important. And specifying and clarifying the nature of the partnerships, so for IHS purposes. So excellent. So with that, any questions while we've got everybody together? So nice when you can.
No, excuse me, I was just going to add that in the group that I had an opportunity to observe, we had a rich conversation that spoke to a political concern with how educating candidates, and we even addressed a kind of solution by organizing a candidate forum that was nonpartisan. I mentioned that our Get Out the Vote funds could even support a nonpartisan candidate education effort. So it was that enriched our conversation. We also discussed the challenges with how a family might be involved in isolation or quarantine when they learn about the positive test result of a family member, and how that impacts housing issues. In particular, this was in the Santa Clara Valley. Although there's a provision for hotel use, if you find out your diagnosis at a certain point in time when the government offices are closed, all of a sudden there's still no housing available for you. So there's the need for workarounds that take care of those situations. And then we discussed what may happen when a person learns of their status as being COVID positive, and then they're sort of asked to be an educator for their family to alert everyone about why they need to social distance or what it means for their living situation. So the challenge of learning your diagnosis and then being asked to become a health educator of sorts when you go back home was mentioned as a real burden for many people, and probably an overwhelming burden. So our discussion was engaging.
Thank you. And this is what I love about breakout rooms. In just a few minutes, you were able to all talk about so many different things that are so important. So thank you all for sharing. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and finish talking about this and talking about contingency succession planning. So don't go away. Be back in 5. Get yourself a cup of coffee or stretch, and we'll see you in 5. Oh, we've got about 1 minute. So just like the breakout rooms, here's your 1 minute warning, and we'll get started again in a minute. Some of the headshots are so lifelike, I feel like I'm looking at people and then I realize it's a picture.
Right, they're definitely really great.
Yep, yep. Yeah. Let's see. All right, are we back? I guess I was supposed to move there. There we go. No. There we go. Okay, welcome back. And let's talk a little bit about care delivery options. And again, this is something that the board might talk about and the staff would execute, but we've talked about how can you change your care delivery options. And some of the things, just to kind of summarize that we've already talked about, could be going to more telehealth, whether that is phone, computer, tablet. Some healthcare organizations have been able to help members have access to Wi-Fi so that they can do remote care delivery. Some, as we've mentioned, have provided in-home service. That's another way to keep your members safe. Drive-through flu shots, parking lot COVID testing, having a hotel partnership, whether that's with a community resource or someone that can help isolate people who need it. So thinking about things that your organization has done and things that could be done. Next steps in your emergency planning and thinking ahead for what might be coming and what is coming is to conduct a vulnerability analysis. So again, looking at what you have, looking at what you need, what supplies, staff, community messaging, communications, letting people know what they need to do or not do. How does that impact the other services? So if people are afraid of COVID, should they come in for their dental appointment? Should they have their exams? Helping people understand what to do to be safe and be healthy. Expand those emergency plans that we've talked about. If you don't have one, please make sure you do. Coordinate your pandemic response with your staff, your tribal leaders, your community partners, your patients, so that people know what's going on. Order extra supplies, fill any gaps in staffing you have if possible. And I know some organizations try to hire additional staff for the winter when they're normally bombarded heavier anyway. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But just trying to get the word out. So your goal is to create a better short-term future. And again, that might be then thinking the next 3 to 6 months. What are the intentional choices that you can make to best support your UIO and those people that it serves? Synchronize the strategies that you have for the emerging future. Go back to the lessons that you've learned, both from your earlier experience and from others here today and through the rest of the series. And then encourage flexibility. what can you do? How can you have a plan A, a plan B, maybe a plan C?
Sorry,
As we move
Joanne,
forward.
not to interrupt you. We can't
Sure.
see your slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. I lost visibility of you guys, but I thought you could see the slides. My apologies. Let me go back and go back to, sorry, give me just a sec. Share screen. My apologies. Thank you for saying something.
Sure.
Okay. Can you see them now?
Yes, we can. We can see both monitors.
Okay, great. Let me. Is that now full screen?
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Okay. My apologies. I clicked on something and I apologize. Okay, so leverage the urgency of the situation to implement difficult decisions. When I used to work for a large healthcare system, I trained over 200 change agents, and we used to talk about change is hard. In these times, it's easier to make change when you can explain to people why we need to do it and why we need to do it now. And it's much easier to get that buy-in. So quickly, how best to communicate with your executive director and other board members? Several of you have said executive directors have become more empowered so that they can make decisions and move things forward quickly. Some of you may be meeting face-to-face. I think more are meeting virtually, as that is still probably the safest way for us to communicate. Other ways might be group texts, WhatsApp, using board technology. And one of the things that I always encourage, if you're sending out a message, change your header frequently. So if it's inform whatever, so people can get to it whenever. Or if it's urgent, put the urgent in a timeline so that you can get a timely response so that decisions can be made quickly and move forward. Any questions there? We have a lot of squirrels in our yard and I love to take pictures. All right, then I'm going to move into succession planning. Typically, a succession planning identifies who is interested and capable for promotion or increased scope of work. So I'd love to see, now let me just go into the next slide. So this is your typical performance we call it a 9-box, and I borrowed this from a company, so ignore the DOHR. That just happens to be the organization. But when you're doing succession planning in an organization, and whether you have 10 employees or 200 employees, it's important to begin to identify, looking at this across the top, everybody falls into one of 9 boxes. And I've seen the board do this with the CEO, and then usually the executive team does this with the director level next down. And in very large organizations, I've rolled this out to a 25,000 person organization. Each level does the planning for the level below it until you get to the frontline leaders who do it with the frontline staff. So it's a way of looking at your talent pool and dividing them into 3 categories based on performance. At the bottom, poor performer, good performer, outstanding performer. Poor performers need development. Good performers are currently meeting expectations at the top, and outstanding performers are exceeding expectations. So we're measuring people on 2 things: performance, which might be how they do their job, their technical skills and abilities, their being a subject matter expert, developing and maintaining working relationships that speak to the organization's value. The second thing we look at is their potential. Some people we might hire to be a medical assistant or a receptionist. And they might stay in that role for years and they can do that role well. And they would be limited potential. Then we might have somebody who is a medical assistant but would like to go to school to become a nurse. And perhaps they're working as the MA while they go to nursing school. They may have moderate potential because they can climb the ladder to become a nurse and potentially more. Or we may see them as a high potential, where maybe they're that MA today, next year they're going to have their nursing degree, 5 years from now they may be your lead nurse, director of nursing, or part of your executive team. High potential. So when we hire someone, we may only be looking to fill the slot today, but over time we're looking at, can they grow in their role, or can they take on other roles in the organization? And so when you're looking at this color code, the 3 areas we tend to focus on the most are the green. Somebody who meets expectations is a good performer with high potential, or somebody who is 2A, an outstanding performer with moderate potential. So we could see promoting them at least once. In the far right 1A box, this is your star. Wherever they might be in the organization, they may not be a leader today, but your executive director might be able to say, I hired this person. Maybe he's a doctor, maybe he's recently out of residency and he wants to work in your organization. But based on his compassion and his knowledge or her wisdom and her experience, I could see them becoming our medical director 5 years from now when our current medical director gets ready to retire. So it's thinking ahead of how you can help grow these people so that you see future opportunity for them. Does that make sense? Any questions there? You can come off mute and ask. Okay.
Nothing in the chat box.
Thanks. Then let's do a quick poll, Noelle, to see, does your organization currently conduct succession planning annually? Occasionally? No, but we're thinking about it. No, maybe I wasn't even familiar with this, and I'm not sure. Good, the votes are coming in. So we've got 7 out of 15 so far. Let's give it another couple seconds. Here they come. Anybody else want to get your votes in? Okay, Noel, if you'd like to end polling and show the results, please. We are across the board. 22% said yes, we do it annually. 33% do it occasionally. So 55% are currently using succession planning. 11% no, and 33% are 3 not sure. Thank you. Okay, so we can get rid of the poll, please. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. And now let's talk a little more. So succession planning, as I mentioned, once you've identified those people, then you want to start to decide with limited opportunity. There are some classes you train everybody. Everybody needs to know emergency procedures, protocols. But if you have limited dollars to send someone to a conference or a virtual event or to invest in, you decide, who do you want to develop and train? What needs to happen to prepare people for the future? So I had the chance to talk with Jennifer from Native American Connections. Her leader has been there 40 years. Somebody needs to start thinking succession planning, because while we'd love to keep her forever, at some point, the organization will need a new leader. Do they have someone that they're grooming to take that place, as an example? Think ahead for those vacancies, retirement, moves. Think ahead for talent pipeline. If you want to grow a new service line, you need organizational growth. Then today we want to talk more around contingency planning. What happens if one of your key leaders becomes ill or is unable to work or passes? And I want to share this story with you. This is Curtis Joe. He is from the San Carlos Apache tribe. And this picture was taken October 2019 when he graduated from my Arizona Institute for Healthcare Leadership program. His organization sent him because they saw him as someone with potential that they wanted to invest in to develop. He was currently their director of security. In June of 2020, I learned that at the age of 35, Curtis is no longer with us. And he left behind a wife and 3 children. And so you never know. Here's someone that we thought might have had 20 or 30 more years career. And suddenly he's not there anymore. And I'm sure that many of you have experienced things where there's a very unexpected loss, as well as some anticipated losses. So whether it's short term, and maybe you have a staff member who gets sick, or someone in their home who is ill and they need to quarantine and are unable to work or need to care for that other person, thinking about what are some of the things that we can do. And so a couple of examples come to mind, and again, feel free to come off mute and talk about what you've done. So one thing right now, if you haven't already, is where can people be cross-trained? Where can you begin to start identifying a successor? And one of the things that Curtis did last fall was he had a staff of 30 working for him, and he identified someone who he wanted to become his assistant director, and he worked with HR and created that job description and worked with his executive team and was able to promote that person. So instead of saying there are 30 people, who's going to be next in charge, it led a pretty logical solution that she should be promoted to director, and then someone else should be promoted to fill her role, so that the organization was not at a loss for too long before they were able to begin moving forward. So cross-train, identify successors, promote people. Is there someone else who maybe has similar experience from another organization who can step in? Do you have perhaps a retiree who could come back on a limited basis? Or someone from another organization? One of the large healthcare organizations, Banner Health here in Arizona, sent nursing staff from Arizona to Colorado when COVID hit there hard. And then a few months later, when COVID hit Arizona hard, Colorado sent staff to help. So are there places that you might be able to share staff with as the country experiences peaks and valleys in other areas? Can you share staff with someone else? Can volunteers come in and work at the top of their scope? Any other ideas or thoughts that you are thinking of or have tried that you'd like to share when a key leader is ill? And I tipped my hand because some of those things also apply if your key medical staff becomes ill. So if you are needing to quarantine, if you have a provider, clinical member of staff who becomes ill or cannot work. Twice in the last 2 weeks, I have talked to people who had staff who were pregnant and they were anticipating working full term and going out on leave. And instead, one is out with twins at 6 months on complete bed rest. So they had not anticipated her leaving that quickly. And another was working full term at 7 months and literally gave her boss 2 days notice to say, this is getting to be too much. I can't do this as of Friday, it's my last day until after the baby's born and I come back from leave. So you have a semi-anticipated event that occurs earlier than expected. How can you deal with some of those kinds of things? Any suggestions or thoughts? I'm going to put you in breakout rooms so that you can discuss them with each other. So let's give them 5 minutes in the breakout room with a 1-minute warning. And that way we'll come back and we'll finish our discussion and go into Q&A. Please click the join so we can.
And Joanne, just so you know, you are on. Yep, there you go.
As soon as I said it, I realized, I'm like, I'm on mute.
Yep,
All
and we
right,
cannot
well,
see your slides as well, just as a reminder.
that's true. This time I want to see everybody's faces, and then
Okay.
we will go back to the
Perfect.
slide. Yes, thank you, Zep. I appreciate you keeping me on track. So who wants to report out? What kind of ideas did you come up with?
I'll go first. In our group, we talked about the way the clinic that I'm a board member for is structured in the way the offices are set up, and is to where they're encouraged to work as teams. So even if an employee is out, their patients are not out. There are still others around that are aware of their situation and also are working with them. Also within another idea is they have within their personnel file, they have a contingency person that is being trained and that they feel like they have the ability to take over if things happen. I'm unsure within my organization if we have that in place. So that is a question that I'll bring to my board of directors.
Excellent. That's a great question to bring back.
Mm-hmm.
And being in that group, having that person identified and then having a written training plan and the ability to help develop that person. So even for peace of mind in the future, when we're allowed to do things like go on vacation, knowing that someone can manage the show while you're gone is peace of mind that you don't have to check emails 1,800 times a day. Great. Who else wants to share?
Well, we also talked about promoting from within, encouraging that. And in that way, we want everyone to be working at the highest of their ability so that they don't get bored or disinterested.
Yes, and that was, we also talked about a great way to promote AI internally. So developing people to be able to take those roles. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joanne. Okay, another group, please.
I can go ahead and speak for our group, I think.
Thanks,
So we had Walter share some really good comments on some items that their team has already in place, which does include a CEO succession planning, and which they've identified key members in their senior management group, which would be kind of chain of command, next in line, if you will, for an immediate succession response. And then a recruitment plan for like longer term if, you know, the CEO or whomever does indeed need to be out for longer than that. They also do have an incapacitated provider policy on hand as well for providers who maybe are becoming incapacitated, as well as providers who maybe do not refuse to treat a patient or refuse to do a procedure as well. So I think those are also some of the things that folks have been running into. I think since the COVID-19 dilemma had started too. So again, just some really good comments of having policies in place, proactively addressing those elements as well is definitely going to be crucial to your organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great suggestions and recommendations. Thank you. Who else? Can we get one more group to share?
So Joanne, there actually ended up only being 2 groups, just with
okay.
people who had limited mic capacity. So I think that covers both of them. But
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I knew I was in group 4 the first time, so I was assuming 4. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, then let me mention a couple that you might have talked about but didn't come back to the full group. So if you can't handle it within your own group size, you have the option, and again, some of these may be costly and may not be within the budget, which is why you have to have that extra money sometimes. But if you need to hire locums, which are temporary doctors or providers who can come on, temporary nurses, traveling nurses, which often will sign up for a period of time. The typical is like a 13-week stint, but it might be as short as 4 weeks. So if somebody Gosh, my vet at one point broke her arm. And so they brought in literally a temporary veterinarian to care for, it had to be an ophthalmologist veterinarian, which is a unique breed. So finding someone who can meet the needs of your group, using per diem help, perhaps in urban areas, there's someone like I have a daughter-in-law who is a ICU nurse. And while she's with one hospital, she does per diem work at another hospital because as a COVID trained nurse, she's in very high demand. And so you might find someone who are very well trained, who are willing to give you maybe 1 or 2 shifts a week over a period of time. So those are some options to think about. Another is some of the med schools were letting residents graduate early so they could get out in the field and help. Nursing schools might, again, let someone to work to their skill level so that your trained nurse could work at a higher level. Looking at perhaps someone who has retired but still has a valid license, or who has retired in an administrative capacity, who could come back and fill a role for 3 months while someone's out on leave. So thinking creatively with what you do have and who you do know, and reaching out to NCUIH, to who do they know that maybe somebody is able to serve. I know when we talked with Sonia, she mentioned that other organizations have been coming to theirs for ideas and to brainstorm. So relying on each other, you are the experts, and that's why we wanted this to be an interactive session so you could share with one another what you're learning and what you're doing. So actually the last slide that I have is really just questions. So rather than going back to PowerPoint, I find it more fun to be able to look at each other. So let's come off of mute if there are any questions that you have. We've got a couple minutes, and I want to make sure that whatever you signed up for, we've tried to at least address some of your ideas, concerns, and needs. So please come off mute and ask that question that we did not get to. There's no possible way I answered everybody's questions. I know I am not that good. What are they?
You're just that good, Joanne.
I'm not. I'm not. I think it's the breakouts where you all helped each other and you said, yeah, that's the answer. All right. Well, if there are no questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Zep.
Yeah, and if you could share the screen, please.
Let me do that. I apologize.
Sure. Thank you guys all so much for participating. I'm hoping that you guys were able to get some good information from this particular session. And if you guys could just down at the bottom where the reactions are on your line, if you could just, I guess there's an applause button there, but if you could just raise your hands to let us know how many of you guys found this session beneficial. Using the react, or yeah, you could give us a thumbs up as well. Perfect. Yep. Same. Awesome. Okay. So we are seeing the thumbs up coming through here. Perfect. Thank you guys so much. So we do have a series evaluation. And if Joanne, if you could place that into the chat box as well, that would be great. So folks can easily access that. And then she also does have her information on the next slide too.
It's not letting me do that while I'm screen sharing. Maybe Noelle or somebody can throw that in.
I will be
there.
happy to drop it in there.
Great, thank you
If I go
so
out
much.
of slideshow mode, I can't advance. So
Yeah, no worries. Okay.
hang on. Of course, now it says PowerPoint is not responding. Why would that be?
Okay, and I could share my screen too as well.
You know what? Let me stop sharing and do that. I apologize.
Okay, perfect.
There you go. Now you can take it.
Okay, great. And let me just mute my dings that are happening right now. All right, so give me 1 second here, share my screen, and let's go with the PowerPoint. Okay, and then just if you could comment or give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen. Okay, great. All right. So right now we do have time for a question and answer. So if you guys are able to unmute all of your lines, and if Noelle, you could take everybody off of mute, that would be great. So just to kind of help with the Q&A session, I know we've only got a couple minutes here, about 5, but are there any like questions you guys have around like policies even? As mentioned, there are CEO succession policies out there, as well as incapacitated provider policies. I also know that these, the emergency plan, as well as the strategic plans also are required by some federal regulatory agencies. I know that IHS, OUIHP, they also ask for it during their site visit. HRSA asks for it during their site visit. The AAHC asks for it, and so does the Joint Commission. So does anybody have any questions around any of those particular, I guess, narrowed down requirements or regulations at all that you might want to ask each other as well? No, no question. Go ahead.
I was curious with regard to how those plans are recorded. Would they be an appropriate arena for policy only, or would they be more concrete, for example, in bylaws? Where would be the best place for those succession plans to be housed for an organization?
Yeah, that would definitely be, I mean, that's a great question. I know that a lot of individuals do have it in policies. That way it can also translate into the employee handbook. And that also comes into play for the incapacitated provider piece, also for contracts too. So it would be a good idea. My recommendation would be to have it in policies, because then that also has procedures that accompany it for the if this happens, then this happens. But it also helps folks to think well in advance before that situation arises. And please feel free. Yeah, and other folks feel free to chime in too. And if there are no other questions, oh, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to share, we have ours as a part of the evaluation for the directors, managers, and supervisors. And so that goes into their file so that when we do the evaluations, we make sure that those are up to date, so that if something does happen, there's the director's manager or supervisor has appointed somebody or recognizes somebody that can take over, even if it's in the interim. So it becomes part of the evaluation.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. I know that a lot of folks are also looking for best practices to do annual evaluations or performance check-ins too. So that's a really good idea to house it there. So it's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone kind of. But yeah, thank you for sharing, Sonia. Any other comments? I know we're pressing down to 3 minutes remaining, and I want to be respectful of your time. Nothing else? Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next item here. So here's the entire series listed. So up next on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we do have Understanding Finances for Non-Financial Leaders, which will be hosted by Lori Linder. We do have on October 30th, which is next Friday at 1 p.m., How to Develop Board of Directors Metrics and Ties to Strategic Plans. And that's a session that I will be facilitating. November 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we have board self-evaluation tools. And some of you guys might remember the...
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, Walter? I think he might have just been off of mute. So November 4th, we do have a Board of Directors self-evaluation tools training with a repeat presenter, Mr. Tony Scucci. So if you guys had joined the spring sessions this year, he was one of the facilitators at that time as well. And then November 6th at 1:00 p.m. Eastern time, we have IHS tools for urban programs. So that is going to be facilitated by Rick Mueller, as I'm sure a lot of you guys know him as well. And if you could just drop the registration link quickly in the chat box, Noelle, that would be great. And then just a really quick reminder, we also do have our Get Out to Vote series. So if you have not yet voted, please get your ballots in as soon as possible. In addition to that, we are also soliciting for additional Get Out to Vote funding. So if your organization has not yet applied, please do. We are looking to get you some additional funds so that you guys are able to assist your staff just to get out to vote. And although the election does end on November 3rd, keep in mind that we also are trying to encourage folks to also understand that their vote doesn't just end at the ballot box, that we do have advocacy tools for them to use, you know, how to write a letter to your congressional leader, how do you make a phone call to your congressional leader, how do you advocate, for example, for the continuation of SDPI funds, and everybody has that opportunity to. So we've got 2 webinars coming up. One is going to be on Tuesday as well next week. That's for the general public. It is on our Facebook, so if you guys could share that, that would be great. And then we also do have one on Wednesday again, and that's for how to get Native youth civically engaged within your organizations as well. But aside from that, thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.